This week's podcast is brought to you by Avast, a global leader in digital security and family safety solutions for network operators and their customers. The needs of consumers are changing. Wherever they are, wherever they go, whatever device they use, they expect their digital lives to be seamless, simple, safe, and secure. With over 15 years of experience delivering award-winning security solutions with network operators, Avast makes it easy for consumers to manage their digital life security using just one simple interface. That's security for all devices, wherever they are and however they connect. Let Avast help you build a safer digital world for your customers. Discover more at avast.com/partners. That's avast.com/partners. Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. This is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor here at Light Reading, and I'm joined on this podcast by Paul Brodsky, who is a senior analyst at TeleGeography. On this show, we'll discuss voice traffic on carrier networks and how that business has changed over the years, even though the business itself is still very stable and isn't going away anytime soon. It's getting smaller, though. We'll get into some detail there. TeleGeography's latest estimates say that international over-the-top voice traffic reached 1 trillion minutes in 2019 compared to just 432 billion minutes of international carrier traffic. So the over-the-top voice traffic is exploding. We'll discuss the story behind the numbers right after this. All right, joining me on the Light Reading Podcast today is Paul Brodsky, senior analyst at TeleGeography. And TeleGeography, if you don't know, they are all about tracking and watching voice traffic. They watch voice traffic data for 61 countries and over 1,000 routes worldwide. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
Thanks, Phil. Great to hear from you. The job is it's not quite as exciting as you describe it, but it can be pretty hair raising at times. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's particularly relevant now because everyone with COVID-19 forcing everyone into social distancing and things like that. We're all working from home. The network is under a different kind of strain than it normally is, but there's a couple of things that have been consistent. And even though I guess even though people are using more UCAS and other kind of collaborative platforms, like my work life, for instance, is all about Microsoft Teams and WhatsApp for my international colleagues. But I realized the other day that I very rarely make a cellular call for work, even though I use SMS a lot, and it made me wonder, like, how much the OTT and other applications are taking over international voice traffic.
Yeah, I mean the OTTs have certainly taken a chunk out of traffic. There's still over our latest estimate for 2018 was something on the order of 430 billion minutes of international voice traffic, just on the traditional telephones, both fixed lines and mobile as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, the idea that somehow nobody's using their phone to call overseas is simply not true. We think the
Right,
volumes are
right.
shrinking a bit, but it's not going away anytime soon.
So it's still more than what, 4 or 5 times what you would see on the OTT side?
Oh, no. The OTTs, we believe, do have a majority now of the international voice
Oh,
traffic.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and the way we kind of back into these numbers, if I could
Uh-huh.
sort of explain how we come to our figures. Again, we have data going way back, and it shows that on average over the last many years, um, we see about a 13% or so compounded annual growth rate in international voice traffic. This goes back many, many years. In other words, every year there seems to be about 13% more international voice traffic than the year before. That's been a fairly consistent trend.
Hmm.
And then the OTTs came along, and we started seeing a flattening of that of that increase. And now we're actually seeing a slight reduction in the amount of traffic that the international carriers are carrying. But there's no reason to believe that people aren't still talking to each other, and that traffic growth does not continue to grow overall. So we have made some assumptions where maybe with the rise of texting and emails and some
Mhm.
other things that maybe that 13% annual increase, well, let's drop that down to about 9% or so annual increase. And since we know how much is carried by the international carriers, and that number is going down slightly, we can back into a number of what we think of how much we think the OTT providers are actually carrying. Um, I hope that isn't sort of
Mhm.
again another sort of a long answer to a short question, but
Yeah,
we've got
no.
yeah. So we estimated 2018 that the traditional international voice carriers carried about 460 billion minutes of traffic, whereas the OTTs carried close to 900 billion minutes. And in 2019, our estimates are that the OTTs will carry about twice as much, actually a little bit more than twice as much as the traditional voice carriers. And again, that's based on what we think. We think people are still calling each other, and we know how much the voice carriers are carrying. So the difference, roughly, is what we think is coming from the OTTs.
What kind of business is it for the international carriers when, just to use WhatsApp as an example, when I 5 years ago, I would have placed cell phone calls or a landline call to my colleagues in London that work at our sister publications and stuff like that. Now I'm just using I'm just calling them on WhatsApp or on Teams, so that we're still talking just
Yeah,
as much as we ever did,
yeah,
but
yeah.
using a completely different medium.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. You're still talking to your colleagues and your friends and perhaps relatives or whatever overseas. You're just using a different technology. And some of the technologies are in the case of like Skype out, which is a computer to a regular telephone. I mean, the international
Hmm.
carriers are still involved in that particular kind of transaction. They're still terminating the traffic. But in the case of WhatsApp, I believe it really is just a straight IP from one device to another. And so, yeah, no, that is having an impact, no doubt. Now, keep in mind, you're able to use services like WhatsApp because you have a 4G handset with you.
Right.
A lot
Yeah.
of people still don't have that. But
Yeah.
those numbers are dropping. The penetration of 4G handsets is going up everywhere, but they're still not ubiquitous. So there's still a market out
Yeah.
there.
That's a really good point. There's also the function of, the uh, revenue base that carriers are drawing from is just changing. It's
Mhm.
going from the voice minute to the data,
Mhm.
uh, data use. And so, while I still may be, while I may not be paying by the minute for voice calls, I am essentially paying by the gigabyte for data, and eventually, that adds up as well, depending on what app I'm using.
Yeah, and keep in mind the long haul portion of those calls, again for the international calls, is more and more of it is being carried over IP anyway. The traditional what they call time division multiplexing technology is
Right.
still out there. That stuff was developed by the phone companies, back when that's all there was many
Hmm.
years ago, and it really did one thing and one thing alone: carry voice traffic. IP obviously is much more flexible, can carry all sorts of stuff all at the same time. That's the whole point of IP. Um, and But there's still a fair bit of TDM equipment out there. Actually, it's quite reliable. And until it breaks
Yeah.
down, there's no reason not to just wring as much revenue out of it as you can.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is I wondering, when I was sort of asking, like, what kind of business is this for them? I imagine that they're in that situation of it's probably a continually shrinking business, just like,
Yeah,
local fixed line
yeah,
uh, phone calls. But it's something that'll probably never go away either, since they've already bought the assets and
yeah.
continue to monetize them.
And that's our view of it as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What is the in the fixed line world? Is there still a lot of uh, do you all still track a lot of fixed line phone usage? Is that still?
Yeah, those numbers, it's still out there. We have numbers on this. I think we're under a billion lines now worldwide. I could check.
Mhm.
But no, those numbers really are coming down.
Yeah.
dramatically. But still it's still counted in the hundreds of millions of fixed lines around the world. It's not like
Yeah.
yeah,
What's
it's not like the the ivory-billed woodpecker or something. I mean, it's out there.
that's a handy reference.
Yeah, I think so.
When it's interesting because yeah, that part is dropping, is dropping off maybe faster. But back
Yeah,
to back to kind of the OTT apps. I mean, it's interesting to see how much they've changed the the way we. Well, I still want to say that not really the way we communicate. We're still making phone calls, but they're just going over we're just using a different mechanism to connect
yeah,
to the phone calls.
yeah, yeah.
Um, how do you guys see that business, evolving over time? Does anyone stand to see, business growth in that space other than in just the, what they're doing now, terminating traffic and that sort of thing?
It's a commodity business. It just is, and the it, you it's a scale business, and a lot
Yeah,
of the traditional uh, uh, carriers have just gotten out. You either go big or you go home. And so
yeah.
companies like Verizon, for example, have just decided the international long distance business is just not something they want to be in anymore. And so, more and more, they just sort of turn over that traffic to, international wholesalers who carry the traffic for them.
What was
Yeah.
the milestone that initial that OTT voice traffic has reached lately? Has it sort of hit a different threshold in the international market?
You mean in terms of volumes?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
to be honest, it's hard to know. They don't publish those numbers.
Uh huh.
They barely publish subscriber numbers because a
Okay.
lot of these, well, depending on the company, some of these apps tend to be sort of add-ons, like Facebook. Like
Right. Yeah.
how much money does Facebook make, and or Google?
Yeah.
How interested are
It's.
they? It's not like they need to publish with their 10Ks how many voice subscribers they have because if it's not I wouldn't exactly call it a loss leader, but it's not
Hmm.
it's not their main business. So they barely publish those numbers at all. So again, we kind of have to back into our figures for how much traffic is being carried. And
Hmm.
so again, we think I think it's a reasonable estimate that they're carrying about twice as much international voice traffic as the traditional carriers are. Um, and but we don't. It's not like we see a doubling every year. I mean, it's a substantial
Right.
increase, but there's no reason. We don't have any reason to believe that international voice business is just going to stop anytime real soon. The PSTN is just too
Yeah.
big. There's like 8.5 billion, telephone numbers out there. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing too. Is it still amazes me the size and scope of the public switch
yeah,
telephone
yeah,
network, like how big it is, how pervasive it is, and of course still very reliable.
yeah.
So yeah, even though these things are I guess rounding errors in a larger business inside of Google. There,
Well,
the voice business is still definitely a business for carriers,
mhm.
and it may be maybe shrinking year over year, but it's still something.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Paul, thanks so much for your insights and for being on the podcast. I do
Oh, I had
appreciate it.
I had so many more questions I'm prepared to answer.
Well, okay, actually, here's the
uh,
worst interview question of all time,
oh
but
shoot.
but since I'm doing the interview, everybody will know it's my thing. What's the question you wish I would have asked that I didn't?
No, the question about it's funny. The question about I mean, everyone's talking about COVID, of course. God help us if hope you stay
Yeah.
healthy. One thing I am kind of curious about is when we get around later in the year uh, to surveying operators. What are we
Hmm.
going to see any interesting or sort of funky blips in traffic patterns? I just I don't know,
Oh,
and I'm really curious to see that.
that is interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
it's all coming from a different place now. It's instead of being centralized in buildings, one would think it's being more, coming more spread out. And,
yeah, I mean, the way I was
uh,
thinking is with international travel basically shut down. Are we going
yeah.
to see a bump in international calling? In lieu of
Mhm.
traveling. So I don't know. It's something, just something I'm looking forward to seeing.
I'm interested in the whole, how this when people and this I could I'm kind of biased here because I've worked from home for so long, but when these Slack and Teams and these type of collaboration platforms came along, and then integrated things like you know conference calling, push button conference calling and that
Mm,
sort of thing,
mhm.
it it made me really think like how many people are going to get their home office set up and then decide, hey, I kind of like this better, and
Yeah.
just stay right where they are. I wonder what percentage of the workforce that was forced home might not ever turn up in the office again.
So I am a case study in that I rarely, if ever, work from home, and I'm sort of forced to
Hmm.
do so right now. And I don't know, I've set up a decent little space here in my kid's former playroom. Um, the problem is, and I think a lot of people, like as the people as you described, if you have kids who are home from school, I mean,
Mm,
that would
yeah,
just chase them away. Like I'm never doing this ever again. But
yeah, indeed.
yeah, similar scenario. But the kids are in school. Yeah, yeah. No, if once we, hopefully this life kind of gets back to normal again, the kids go back to school, I could certainly see myself working from home maybe once or twice a week. It's pleasant here.
Yeah,
Going off and do a quick grocery run at lunch if I have to.
I think that'll change. The puts a new importance on broadband service and voice service in the home as well.
Yeah. Oh, no
That
doubt. No.
maybe hasn't been there in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul. Well, thanks so much. I do appreciate the insight, and we'll have you on again soon.
Yeah, it'd be great, Phil. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Avast for sponsoring this week's podcast. Avast partners with network operators around the world protecting the digital lives of their customers. With over 15 years of experience delivering carrier-grade security solutions, you can trust them to help build solutions consumers can rely on to keep them safe today and to protect them against future threats. Let Avast help you build a safer digital world for your customers. Learn more at avast.com/partners. That's avast.com/partners. That is it. That's our show. Thanks to Paul Brodsky at TeleGeography. He's based in Washington, D.C., and I do appreciate his time and insights today. Thanks to our producer, Tien Fu, for making us sound so good, even when we don't. Thanks to all of you out there listening, because if you weren't paying attention, we wouldn't be able to get away with doing all of this at work or at home, because that's where we all work now. Please do tell a friend to subscribe, and thank you very much for listening to the Light Reading Podcast.